And I welcome to the floor Priyanka Chaturvedi, Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy, and Amar Patnaik, who have come to join us on this occasion in order to have a discussion amongst parliamentarians as stakeholders in many ways in the issues of air quality. First of all, welcome. I don't think you need introduction. You're all well-known public figures. Priyanka Chaturvedi is a Rajya Sabha MP from the Shiv Sena. Rajiv Pratap Rudy is a Lok Sabha MP and former minister from the BJP. And Amar Patnaik is a Rajya Sabha member from the BJD from Orissa. And I must say that we have three very high-quality minds, parliamentarians who are daily involved in the kinds of issues we're discussing today. So let me start by asking all of you one common question. As parliamentarians, our daily jobs revolve around listening to grievances from our constituents, or in the case of Rajya Sabha members, people from our states, civil society groups, NGOs, and so on. So one crucial question which pops up every now and then is, how as parliamentarians can we balance the classic issues of development versus environment? Each of you has had development projects in your states or in your constituencies which are important to you, which generate jobs, which generate GDP, and at the same time damage the environment. How have you approached such situations where the short-term goals of development could have long-term negative consequences for air pollution in particular and for climate change in general? Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy, are you there, sir?
I'm there.
Great.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. So you heard my question, huh?
Could you repeat briefly what you were saying?
The issue of development versus environment. In your constituency, you must have had some projects which were development projects that brought jobs, that increased GDP, but also damaged the air, damaged the environment. How did you approach this? How do you manage to prioritize one over the other?
First, I must thank you for what you have created, this forum, and found a platform for all of us. Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
So it's wonderful. And since I have been associated with climate change and Solar Alliance and so forth and so on for years together, I find what you have created is fantastic. And much more, when I was hearing Nitin Gadkari speak today, amazing. And that's a book which he should write it out and give a... And I'm sure you will get that document to us, because it had very categorical information on many issues which possibly... And I wish he had spoken about some state which is not so developed like Bihar. And he spoke about Kerala, and it was fantastic anyway. Coming to your question, and what I would like to say is, you see, I come from the state of Bihar. I've been almost in parliament and the state legislature for almost 30 years now, and maybe 35 years in politics, while if I had my university days and college days. And today, of course, being a member of parliament from Bihar, and of course, there was a report recently, and which said Bihar ranks, and the Niti Aayog report says Bihar ranks the poorest and the lowest and so forth. And it's not that it got the situation post division from the state, from the Jharkhand. It has been at the bottom ever since. Now, when you talk about these things, I wonder. My constituency would be a population of 16 lakhs, but the district would have a population of about 50 lakhs, which is as good as 4 or 5, equivalent to 4 or 5 states in the country. You ask me, awareness and projects. Well, I don't personally feel that there is enough awareness, seeing the quality of life with which people live, what we understand, and there is a complete mismatch between what we talk, think, and understand to what is the basic understanding about environment, about pollution. And it's a way of life which actually it does not register. The biggest challenge, if we are doing a development, for them, if a road is being made and 100 trees are being cut, no one will ask, if out of a few lakh people, not even one would say, why is it being done? It does not figure at all in the mind frame of these people And we have seen it. We have seen it in all direction. It does not figure. Climate change, to a certain extent, it does figure because they understand the crops and water level is going down. They see floods. But if you talk about air pollution, it figures much more down in the list. For them, it doesn't figure. It does not happen. When the threshers are on, they live in dust. The children go in dust. Everyone moves in dust. The whole village is misty and foggy and hazy. It does not matter to anyone. It does not matter. And if you talk about these things, they will look at you and look at you and stare at you and say, he's talking about something. So he's talking, minister is talking and the MP is talking, so he must be talking something very interesting. So they will listen to you. Impact is zero. So what institutional approach which we can have to sensitize the people of this nation? And if I'm saying this is true for my constituency, it could also be true for your constituency. They cannot feel what is a bad smell of a diesel. They cannot understand a bad smell or a stench of an open drain. They cannot understand. They'll feel discomfort, but they will not. So this pollution thing is quite elitist. Unfortunately, very bad way to put it. It's elitist. And I understand. I'm very particular. I watch on my app every day in which location of the country I am, what is the situation, and I can feel it. It took me 20 years to understand the difference between a pollution state and a good air. It took me years. Now I understand it. But for this understanding to come after 20 years, it's too late. But the nation needs to understand. And development, for them, you construct, you make, you build, you destroy. But this aspect does not figure. And that is a very big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy. Amar, Patnaik, the same question to you. Have you had to contend with issues of development versus environment, either as a parliamentarian or in your earlier career as a civil servant? And how do you approach the issue, as Rajiv Rudy was explaining to us that he does? How do you approach it? Amar, Patnaik.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for hosting this, I think, brilliant debate on the issue of air pollution at a national, transnational level. But, as Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy ji said, the sensitization of people to this issue is, I think, still a lot of work remains to be done. I was just going through some study recently, Pew Research Center 2020 study, which says that 25% of Indians are still giving importance to job creation at the cost of environment, to a very direct question, which basically means that these issues relating to wealth creation, income generation are more important, far more important currently than the issue of environment in general, air pollution in particular. Even more shocking is the fact that the ADR, one of these, again, ADR studies say that they rank air pollution 17th important, as most important in the governance requirements, what they look up to. So when it comes to a question of infrastructure building vis-a-vis air pollution, the only way, of course, besides the fact that they have to be sensitized, but my experience says that we have to communicate the strong causal relationship between air pollution and health to these people. For every household in India, health matters. For the woman in the house, the health of his children matter. Her own health matters. Now, when we made this intervention of the Ujala scheme, smokeless chulha scheme, they would have seen the difference. It has actually happened that the domestic air pollution emissions have actually decreased in our country compared to the outside ambient air pollution. Now, these things have resulted in savings to their out-of-pocket expenditure on health, which is a substantial portion in India, even as it is, could probably give them make them understand that we have to give importance to emitting less pollution. That is number one. Number two, secondly, I would probably think that we have to communicate with them that by adhering to less polluting standards or less pollution material, we are not losing jobs. We are actually creating more jobs. climate adaptation measures results in more jobs and not loss of jobs. Because if 25% Indians are saying that for us jobs are more important, we have to communicate in that language. So when we have done this, using plastic for road construction, as Honorable Minister was mentioning, or we have been doing in several places urban forests in a particular area where there is a slum, we have seen the resistance. But at the same time, I think if community gets sensitized and involved in the process, if it is top down, it won't work. If they get involved, that it creates jobs for them, it creates better health for them, and there is causal relationship, which is evidence-based. I think this should work. But then, we have to do a lot of work. We have to speak in their language. Very often, so far, as Rajiv ji was saying, it's very esoteric, that it affects your lives. It doesn't. It will create bad health for you. You will die. Now, these kind of things have to be spoken in their language. Imagine many of our developments taking place in tribal areas, taking place in areas which are very poor and backward. There, the language of communication with them has to be in their local language. I think this is the third thing that we have to do, and we try to do this, and that is how we develop. For example, the expressway, Biju Expressway from the entire northern part of Orissa, Sundargarh, which is the second most tribal-dominated district in the country, to the southernmost tip has been completed, and it has been done by popular participation of the people, making them understand that both the things are important. And we did leverage their understanding of the environment, which they have more sometimes than us, and we did factor that in. And that way, I think, both the things can go hand in hand, difficult balance, but participation can actually ensure that.
Right. Let me welcome Priyanka Chaturvedi, the other MP on our panel. Priyanka, we've been discussing after Gadkari Sahib's speech, some of the issues of trying to balance development considerations with environmental considerations. When we have projects in our states, Rajiv Pratap Rudy has a long-term politician and parliamentarian, and Amar Patnaik, somewhat more recently, has been how they've been dealing with this issue of how to persuade the public that something which is good for development may be bad for the environment, and something that may be good for the environment may not have immediate visible gains, but would have other ones in future. Have you, in your own experience as a public figure, come across similar challenges, Priyanka, and have you found yourself dealing with resolving this dilemma?
Thank you so much, and apologies for joining late. I've been facing some network issues at home. As far as air pollution is concerned, I have said this at multiple occasions, that most people do not relate with the challenges and the criticality of having to ensure that we need clean air to breathe. It's only during certain periods in a month, in Delhi especially, when this is discussed. Whenever there is stubble burning, we discuss it. We are wearing these masks. We're talking about it. It becomes a talking point inside the parliament, outside the parliament. But once we are out of that phase, it is a forgotten chapter. And that is the unfortunate reality of where we stand today. We need to be able to talk to people and explain to them how important this is, whether in terms of deaths, whether in terms of the kind of air we breathe. It definitely needs to join and be linked with the political narrative of this country. I have said this many times, where we explain to them about fear, and because politics is about selling fear and also selling the idea of hope. Till you do not bring pollution, or you talk about climate change as part of your political narrative, till then we would not be able to even initiate discussions or to explain to people how important this is for our living and for our futures. Your migrations depend on it. Women empowerment depends on it. Incomes depend on it. And that will become the driving force for people to understand that it is far more critical than various other challenges that we are facing, whether it's hateful narrative, whether it's divisive narrative, or various other global challenges. So we need to prioritize that. And at many points, I have been told, because I speak about it a lot. For example, I would give you what happened in Mumbai when RA Forest was being cut down to size because they wanted to have a metro passing through it. We fought tooth and nail for it. Even Aditya Thackeray ji fought for it tooth and nail, because we realized that a city like Mumbai breathes on air like that. And we need the criticality of having urban forests in our ecosystem and sustainable development, where we keep our environment in mind every time we talk about infrastructure building, is what we say is sustainable development is all about. Sustainable development, which many people unfortunately look at a roadblock to development or infrastructure building, is not how it should be perceived. So perception also needs to change, that sustainable development means that you're talking about infrastructure building while keeping the ecology in mind. And that is what we fought for in Maharashtra, especially in Mumbai, and we managed to do that. We managed to deliver. So till you do not make this as part of your politics, you do not prioritize this, you're going to face questions about how we look at these critical elements. And I would continue to say this till it does not become a part of every political party's manifesto. Till then, we can continue talking at such events and sessions and these closed door meetings without connecting with the larger public, until we don't tell the masses that if you do not support us in this, if we do not talk about this, you all are the ones who are going to be migrating. You all are the ones who are going to be jobless. You all are the ones who are going to have problems in terms of how we look at our futures, shared futures. So this is where we stand, and this is what my thought process on this particular issue is. Unfortunately, even the government, in terms of budgetary support, has, of course, mentioned it, has allocated some budget, but it is extremely small to be able to implement any kind of changes. And I would definitely look at innovation as the way forward, and creating an ecosystem through innovation process to be able to address these challenges. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think all three of you have converged pretty much on the understanding that there isn't yet enough political traction, especially with the voters. Rajiv said it's elitist to talk about air pressure for many people, but now they're beginning to realize the significance of it. And Amar and you have come around to the same thing. And I must say, as I mentioned in my own opening remarks today, when I first started this forum, it was very difficult to get any political buy-in. I had precisely 2 politicians attending the first roundtable, and many who said they might come didn't bother in the end because air pollution didn't seem to them particularly important. Today, I'm so glad we have this kind of buy-in across political parties. Let me now turn to individual questions for each of you, at least one each for each of you, and then we'll come back to one more general question. Let me start in the order in which people have spoken so far. Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy. Rudy Saab, in 2019, you made an impressive speech in the Lok Sabha on various aspects of pollution. In fact, I was proud to participate in that same debate myself. And you highlighted an important issue of blaming the farmers for the practice of stubble burning, which results in a spike in pollution in Delhi NCR, made worse by weather conditions in winter. And you argued that it's actually contributed to by a multitude of factors like cropping patterns, weather conditions, other sources, and so on. And why only blame the farmers? This is also one of the contentions of the farmers, which your government has rightfully pulled back. That is, when the government came up with these controversial proposed farm laws, that the government has rightfully pulled back. Now, in your opinion, how do you suggest this narrative on the contribution of stubble burning to pollution and the farmer's role, how is that going to evolve over the next few years? Every time we're in Delhi, in particular as Diwali nears, the combination of stubble burning and Diwali firecrackers has begun to dominate the headlines. How do you think we're going to tackle it? Is there a solution?
Well, not that I'm an expert on the subject. I keep groping on such issues. And recently, I came across a team of UPL, United Phosphorates.
Yeah.
Yes. And what they showed me was fantastic. Now, they did about 20,000 hectares, and they did something with the bio something, and they have proved it. But now, if this activity has to be continued, it cannot be what you call an action on, and it has to be taken up by the governments. You need money. And whether the government wants to spend that kind of money is some question, because I don't believe that there aren't solutions to it, because the world, we have small scale farming, X, Y, Z, and how we are putting in money there. So there are solutions. And if there are poor countries which have similar problems and they have a solution, whether it's Chile or whether it's South American countries, they have a solution to this. Why not in India? It all comes down to big money. So the government has to prioritize and say how it is to be done. Now, Supreme Court gets on you and said you find a solution, NCR region, this and that. Why can't the legislatures and the government plan to do things which they actually want to do? So there is a mismatch. And I'm not a scientist, but there is a solution. There is a way to increase the income of these people. There is a way to get them out of that. And these are old. This practice of stubble burning is not started last year. This has been on for last 75 years or maybe 100 years. Now, with passage of time...
Not exactly. Sorry to correct you. Just that though the practice goes on for time immemorial, the timing was changed because of legislation within the last 10 years that moved the planting season and the harvesting season by 1 month for water-related reasons. But as a result of that, the stubble burning is now happening when the winter fog is descending, and that's why it's much worse for us in the last 10, 15 years.
So it was, I'm sorry about that particular aspect. I may not have heard about it or may not have read about it. But the climatic changes, over-exhaustion of water from the Earth's, from inside the Earth, and so many things happening all across. So solution, I believe there is nothing in science which cannot take care of these situations. But I believe all this means big money. And this big money is what we are talking about. The government has to plan it out. And that vision has to come from there. Science of sorting it out is not with me or Mr. Tharoor.
Well, let's provide the vision and let them provide the money, Rajiv. But thank you for that answer. Let me bring that answer to Amar Patnaik. Because Amar, in your budget speech this year, you expressed dismay at the insufficient funding provided by the government for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. At about 30 crores, that's about 0.012% of India's GDP. And you argue this is not enough for covering the entire gamut of India's environmental changes, and particularly, of course, the fight against air pollution. All of the climate change issues include research, deployment of technology, building climate-resilient infrastructure, using nature-based solutions to tackle pollution, getting subsidies for mitigating the effects of climate change, and so on. And at the same time, the Indian government has been pressurizing the developed countries to extend funding to the developing countries, and transfer of green technology and so on, all of which remains a long-standing unfulfilled promise. So what should be India's future discourse towards financing dedicated to climate change, Amar?
It's a very, very, very important issue. And you know, Dr. Tharoor, that this has been there for a long, long time, both in the Paris Accord and COP26. What I mentioned was that the current thrust of the government seems to be on climate adaptation strategy. How do you adapt? That's important. We need to find finances for it. The private sector has to be incentivized to change their designs in production, innovation. It has to happen through a substantial contribution from the private sector as far as finance is concerned. What I did mention, however, and which is very important to me, is the initial mitigation measures. I said that, for example, whenever there is regularly Orissa, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana, that's this entire eastern coast faces the twin problems of cyclone, drought, the regular intervals. Now, when you are facing cyclones at regular intervals, our chief minister had talked about setting up long-term disaster resilient infrastructure so that the incremental expenditure that you do post a cyclone would actually get minimized. And then people actually do a mitigation, adaptation strategy for their agriculture, for the way they live, the practices that they follow. Unless you do both, it's not going to happen. Therefore, the financial or the finances required for bringing about mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and then monitoring, evaluation, changing practices, behaviors of people, this would require a huge amount of money. We have been arguing before the developed countries that they have just failed to implement whatever their commitments were there in the Paris Accord. We continue to, talk about it. But in the end, we have to also realize that our development itself, our GDP is getting impacted due to the adverse effects of climate change and air pollution in particular. Therefore, we have to generate that finance ourselves, and that has to come from government in substantial measure, and also equally important is the private sector investment, which is anyway not happening. More importantly, I think our entire PLI scheme, our entire manufacturing sector thrust that is being given, it should be tagged to innovations in climate adaptation measures. And then the investment can actually get tailored towards achieving the twin objective of industrial growth, as well having climate mitigation mitigation measures in place. Now, this I spoke in the budget that when the goals were very lofty, 0.012% of the GDP, when you're talking that your GDP is growing at 7 to 8% or 8 to 9%, it doesn't augur well because you are not walking the talk. You don't even appearing to be walking the talk. And that's where I think my grouse is, my quarrel was with the budget, and I did mention it, that we need to really think in a very integrated way of climate preventive mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and not in a piecemeal manner by giving just policy announcements. For private sector to participate, I have a feeling that one is, of course, through generating funds from the private equity through these startups and all that kind of thing that we are doing so far, and pretty well, I thought. But we have to have our bargaining position in the climate discussions globally. I think we have to pitch it up, actually. We have to think about, if the European Union is thinking about a border tax, we also have to think about a similar countermeasure, because I think the whole world realizes that it is the Southeast Asia which will now have to act. China has already acted. We have to do it.
Thank you, Amar. Yes, a point very well taken. And let me now turn to Priyanka, or return to Priyanka. Priyanka, you had introduced an important private member's bill last year titled the Council on Climate Change Bill, which seeks to fill a sort of legislative lacuna on addressing climate change by establishing a body at the central and state level, which would focus on tackling climate change and mitigating its effects. Interesting bill. Hasn't been able to make headway so far, but tell us about the idea. Could you elaborate more on the need for such a bill to be considered and its genesis in your thinking?
Actually, the genesis of this idea was the vision of Shri Aditya Thackeray, who's our environment minister in the state. And I'm sure he's going to talk more about it when he's in a discussion with you. When Amar was talking about integrated approach, that is how Maharashtra has chosen to work towards creating more awareness and the urgency and the importance of bringing this into the mainstream narrative. Rather than talking about it in the bylines, sidelines of the challenges that we face, we have mainstreamed it in the state. When I say mainstream, what is the integrated approach? We have introduced climate change in our syllabus. So our children need to understand the urgency and the need for us to create these changes and to have create a transition from how we are used to living to understanding what we are consuming, how we are consuming, and how it's impacting the entire environment system, the ecosystem. When we talk about creating an integrated approach, we are also looking at private-public partnerships and raising funds through private participation, incentivizing corporates and companies to be able to make that transition faster. We have started it from our own governments, where we have categorically said that we will only look at EV cars to buy. When we talk about public transport, mass rapid transport, we are switching towards EV as an option. And again, we are incentivizing people to change, to do this transition from the fuel-based cars to electric vehicles. Of course, the challenge comes of charging these batteries and how do we charge these batteries. So creating an environment where we are also speaking to many private players to be able to set up charging systems, creating charging systems in cooperative housing societies and making it more easier for people to make that systematic move. We are also, of course, working alongside the central government and whatever policies they have in place, whether we are talking about, when we are talking about public transport, FAME is one of the important drivers of this transition. So we're working alongside them. most importantly, is making it a political talking point. Shiv Sena is very committed to the idea of being able to have a better world for our next generations to come. And we're committed to doing that. So we've made it a part of our political narrative. It was part of our political manifesto. We created an EV policy, which is one of the most forward-looking policies. And even the vice chairman of Niti Aayog has complimented us for that. So that comes from a vision. And that is when we talk about the Climate Change Council. So this is where we have come till now. Climate Change Council would work a lot like how the GST Council works, where we have the state environment ministers, we have the state forest minister, chaired by the Prime Minister of this country. Prime Minister, simply because I think Prime Minister can be the driving force behind making these changes happen. Every state has its own environmental challenges. Odisha and we are facing similar challenges. So there are lots of collaborations that we can have together and work together. Now, in terms of funding, which has been a sore point, Dr. Patnaik and we were traveling just before the COP26, and we did realize that European nations have managed to prioritize this, have mainstreamed it, and are looking at solutions, and they have technology, they have the wherewithal to be able to support India. But how willing is India to make that transition? Considering the Prime Minister has set some lofty targets, we need to create an environment where we are able to seek that help, seek that support, not just in terms of financing, but in terms of research and tech. And tech, I continue to insist on tech simply because that's the cheapest and the best way for India to find solutions. So that is where I come from, and Climate Change Council will be able to address all that, ideas coming from various states, solutions coming from various states, and implementation on a faster basis and on a priority basis by streamlining it.
Thank you, Priyanka. In fact, last year when Aditya Thackeray participated in the equivalent discussion, he made the same suggestion that we should organize an interstate forum of environment ministers, he, of course, being one from your state, to discuss precisely how states could share experiences and lessons learned and see how they could learn from each other. And I think COVID did come a little bit in the way, but let's see if we can try and do this through AirQualityAsia and make it an innovative way of trying to learn all of this. Let me come back to a general question to all three of you. And in the same order, we'll start with Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy. Rajiv, we were discussing, I think, the bursting of crackers during Diwali, stubble burning, all of that. Now, one thing that some people have said is this is basically politicized air pollution issues. That making discussions around air pollution is crucial for greater accountability and more progress, etc. But when it gets politicized, when some people say, why are you attacking our Hindu festival of Diwali? No one is attacking Diwali. They're attacking the pollution in the air, but nonetheless that becomes a problem. And then the politicization of the issue threatens to derail the conversation away from sort of scientific and evidence-based solutions for tackling air pollution to something, unfortunately, more, shall we just say, politicized and polarized in our national discourse. I'd like all three of you to answer this, but let me start with Rajiv. How can we ensure that while we get these issues into the public domain, we avoid the risk of political polarization and focus on, shall we say, a solution-oriented approach?
Well, why do you have to address such issues and such jokers who have to talk about that? I really don't understand. So, number one, that if there are people who are crazy, and let them be crazy, and we cannot have a solution to them. And this happens not only in India, across the world. And look what Russia has gone and done. And so the people built up their own hypothesis, their own logic, and they carry on. So we can't be addressing them. And I think that rhetoric is, you know me well, and I don't want to speak on it, but then fine. And that doesn't make much sense. And we are going to be a victim, and they are also going to be a victim of that. But most of them, it is just a rhetoric which they built up. I wish they were more educated, they would understand more, they could interact more. So this is a crowd which moves in and herds in people across. I don't think that has any legitimacy or can sustain in the long run. That's my view.
Right. Amar, what do you think about this?
No, you're absolutely right. I've been hearing this debate every winter session, and it boils down to completely a kind of politicized discussion, missing the bullet completely of how to change the situation. most interestingly, you would see that the entire Indo-Gangetic plain at that point of time, if you take any city at that point of time, the movement of the air, the movement of the winds at the time is such that everything is polluted, this particular belt. So it's a huge amount of research that is required to study why this thing has happened. Unfortunately, because of politicizing it, these studies, as you said, evidence-based data is not generated. The policy, therefore, is piecemeal, like the one you have, in which you have the current act, which is not really addressing that issue. It's just a temporary solution. And without knowing, it's more a matter of serendipity as to if by chance you find in a certain city it has decreased, then you take credit for it. And if it has increased, then you again blame it on the increased amount of stubble burning in the nearby state. So I would probably think that the scenario can change only if people start demanding clean air. Just as people want affordable quality health care, people want education, people have to demand clean air from all political parties. And if that happens, whether or not it is there in the manifesto of a particular party or not, it'll be bounded on political parties to have the discussion riveted on this issue and not score brownie points by having some temporary policy measures. So I think my thing here is the people have to take charge. They have to be sensitized and made aware that air pollution, having clean air, is their fundamental right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. The Supreme Court has said it. People have not really picked it up. But I think a situation like that, as Priyanka ji was also saying, it has to be a demand from people, and then only it will remain on course, and it will not deviate to a completely trivialized political discussion over an hour's period in the parliament.
Thank you, Amar. Priyanka, what's your thought on this?
So till now, most of the time, the discussion when we start to discuss air pollution, many of it look at it as a class-based worry. But little do they realize that it is the masses who suffer the most. So those who are like us, people like us who are sitting, we can buy an air purifier, we can have this in our homes, we can have a mask, we can do everything to safeguard ourselves, our children, and we do our best that we can. We can move out of the city for a particular number of weeks to be able to breathe better air. Unfortunately, that's not an option for lots and lots of people who are working as daily wage laborers, who are working as migrant laborers, and who are working in jobs where they cannot afford to even look or aspire to have clean air to breathe. And I think that is the fight which is worth fighting for. And that is what the government model should be about, that we're reaching out to the masses and we're explaining to them why it is important to have clean air to breathe. Shorter lives, medical issues, health issues, migration issues. I've already spoken about it. Poverty we can be driven further into poverty. Women feeling more disempowered. Till we do not fill that cannot have that discussion, we can continue to have this divisive narrative of, oh, Bakri Eid pe aap log kyun nahi bolte ho? Why is it Diwali which becomes a problem? You reduce it to a religion-based narrative. You reduce it to a political narrative, which is about us versus them. But this is not about us versus them anymore. This is about all of us and our ability to survive. And that, I think, till we as members of parliament, as elected representatives of our constituencies, do not take charge and do not push for building a political narrative out of it and partner with people who are equally concerned and create a mass movement. Till then, unfortunately, we will continue to discuss and debate this and not be able to educate the people at large that how problematic this issue is. And it is about the survival of the human race.
Absolutely. Well, one final question to all of us before we have to wrap up. All four of us MPs come from states, Bihar, Odisha, Maharashtra, and Kerala, that have unfortunately been victims of hydrological disasters such as heavy rains, floods, landslides, cyclones, and so on, which have all, of course, been closely linked to climate change. And as a result, they're likely to get worse over this decade, according to the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which has published a report saying this. So building a climate-resilient infrastructure will become a crucial aspect in resisting and minimizing the impact of climate-induced disasters. So may I ask each of you to give one example of something you're aware of, ideally in your own state, ideally, perhaps even more ideally in your own constituency, but just say in your own state, where there is progress being made towards being climate resilient and mitigating these effects of climate change? One example, and if there isn't one thing that you would like to see happening in your state that would actually help mitigate this problem. Let's start with Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy.
Well, what you say is for me to exactly find out something which is happening in a big way, which could address the issues of climate change, I would be slightly at loss to find out one. But one thing I've been talking for last 30 years since ever I became an MLA in Bihar is the calamity which Bihar suffers every year. And almost 60% of that, the plains in Bihar are flooded. And do you know the reason why? It's nothing to do with the people of Bihar, or maybe a part of Uttar Pradesh as well. The large-scale felling of trees and plants in Himalayas, in particularly in Nepal, which is a destroyed economy, where nothing has worked for last 20, 30 years. As a result, whenever there is huge rainfall in the Himalayan terrain, it gushes down with silt and sand. Now, they have nothing to do with it. It's we who get affected. We lose everything. Now, that government can't do anything. There's no motivation there back in Nepal. And they don't even nowadays, they're not very friendly to India. They're quite hostile these days. And even the government, if it has to go for an irrigation project or if it has to go to look after the dams from Bihar or India, they are not really greeted. Now, this felling, this devastation which has taken place in Nepal in the last 60 years cannot be undone in next 5 years or 10 years. Even if you plan to spend that amount of money internationally and go and say that we want to put plants, it's not going to happen. So as long as that devastation has taken place, we stand devastated for next 50 years. So is there a solution to it? Because this is a state subject with an international situation. People like us have been talking about it. I met Jaishankar. Everyone is clueless about it. And we lose thousands and thousands of crores. Just forget the misery part of it. So mitigation, adaptation, well, we understand it. But how to get going is a big question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy. Amar, Patnaik.
I'll speak about two interventions that currently, one we did earlier and one we are currently executing in the state. I talked about these cyclones that we face regularly. In fact, in the last 100 years, there are about 90 cyclones of various intensities that we have faced. And because of the climate change impact, the last few cyclones have assumed the proportion of super cyclones and have destroyed cities like Puri and Bhubaneswar, the capital. So I think while the Honorable CM of Orissa, Naveen Patnaik, made this plea to the Prime Minister that we need to have long-term disaster resilient infrastructure in the form of underground cabling of power connections, the entire power infrastructure could be put inside the soil. And the second one was building surge walls so that when the water surge takes place, it doesn't destroy the agricultural fields on the Mahanadi Delta. Now, on both the aspects, even though the central government hasn't yet committed in the resources, we have started work on the underground cabling of power infrastructure in the coastal areas. And I think we will see the good result of it, I think, when we actually have completed the project and when the next super cyclone hits. The second one, which I'll talk about, and which did have a lot of impact initially, or even now, is the planting of trees in the catchment areas of the entire Mahanadi River from Chhattisgarh till Bay of Bengal. Now, what it has done in the process is that it has made retention of water from rainfall more. The water tables have gone up. The river has increased its water flow. But we did it through a political process. In fact, it is the political party, the Biju Janata Dal, which took it up as planting of trees in the catchment area of Mahanadi right from the beginning. Of course, there were political reasons for it, but we did it. So in the process, what has happened is that the river has gained strength in terms of water retention. The water table has gone up in those areas where agriculture was taking place, and floods have decreased because of naturally the afforestation measures that have taken place. So I think these are the two big time kind of interventions that the state made and in an effort to negotiate climate change.
Excellent. Thank you, Amar. And let's give the lady the last word, Priyanka.
Great. Thank you so much. Lady always has the last word. So,
yes. The first word and the last word, both.
So it's apt that I end it, right? So all I'd like to say is I've already spoken about the measures that Maharashtra is doing. But the most important thing I think we have done and we've managed to achieve is to mainstream discussion on environment and mainstream it to have a lot more public participation and even corporate participation in it. Having said that, something that Dr. Amar was talking about in terms of afforestation, I must share with you the report that had come, which kind of got the alarm bells ringing, was how Mumbai can go down under by 2015 if we don't take important and urgent measures. So one important factor that Mumbai is troubled with is with heavy rains that fall. And of course, every time we are trolled for it because of the roads getting flooded, parts of Mumbai getting flooded. What little people realize is that the amount of rain that we see in a short duration is way higher than many other parts of the world and urban cities of the world. Yet we are managing to, ensure that the infrastructure doesn't come to a standstill. Of course, it's a long journey for us, but we are working towards it. The most important factor was the mangrove land, which was getting encroached upon, and mangrove land which was getting destroyed for the infrastructure building, etc. We have put a stop to it. We have ensured that Shri Aditya Thackeray and the Chief Minister, who himself is also extremely climate sensitive in these issues and policy making, we declared that as forest land and there can be nothing that can be done. And we are also using high-end technology to see that there's nothing that is encroached upon. We are keeping in mind that technology helps us understand that where are the areas that we need to work upon, where we can work better. So we are using a lot of technology to be able to address these challenges that Maharashtra faces. And we are facing all kinds of weather patterns in Maharashtra. So we understand that, and basis of which we are creating an environment which is mainstreaming all these issues and making people aware that we are all at stake here if we do not take urgent measures towards achieving the targets that the Prime Minister has set for us in the COP26. Maharashtra will be leading that.
Great. Well, that's a positive note on which to end. I really think that the answer does lie very much in state action as well as central government action. And one of our perpetual demands in this roundtable has been for actionable policies coming out of the central government. I repeated that during the Lok Sabha debate in which Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy and I both participated, which is, to the best of my knowledge, the only debate on climate change in the last 15 years that I've seen in Parliament. But I hope we can actually have more and that we can ensure that the political importance of this issue is recognized by all political parties and above all by our governments. I think Nitin Gadkari got us off to an inspiring start today, and our three parliamentarians, Rajiv Pratap Rudy, Amar Patnaik and Priyanka Chaturvedi, have been incredibly eloquent and focused in what they had to say to all of us. I want to thank them for their participation, thank all of those who tuned in today in this conference and, of course, on YouTube. And we look forward to the resumption of this conference tomorrow, roundtable, the fifth roundtable on air pollution. Thank you all very much, and see many of you, I hope, tomorrow. Jai Hind.